From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good afternoon. I'm Chris Murphy. I'm the head of the Near East section in the African Middle Eastern Division, in whose reading room you are sitting. The division has three sections. The African section, whose responsibilities are developing the collection from and about sub-Saharan Africa. The Hebraic section, whose responsibilities are developing the collection from Israel and about Jews worldwide and collecting Hebraica and Judaica worldwide. And the Near East section, of which I'm the head. And on behalf of all the division and our chief, Dr. Mary Jane Deeb, I wish to welcome you to today's lecture. The Near East section basically is responsible for developing the collection from and about all of the Arab countries, the countries of the Caucasus, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia, the Turkic and Iranian countries of Central Asia, and of course Afghanistan, Iran, and Turkey itself. And we are also responsible for developing the collection from and about the Muslims in Western China, in Russia, and the Balkans. And it is in this section, and more broadly this division, where the specialists on these areas reside, and where, if you have questions or research projects, you should come to this reading room to receive assistance. I will say very briefly that the collections here are very large. For Arabic itself, there are about 240,000 volumes now. There are about 70,000 to 75,000 each for Persian and Turkish, Ottoman Turkish. And other languages such as Armenian are now up between 35 and 40,000. Uzbek, we are running about, I think, 4,000. And of course, because we have so many languages and peoples, Ingush, a language spoken in the North Caucasus near the Chechens, we used to have 9 volumes, we now have 12. So you can see that our collections grow and grow rapidly. One of the tasks that we are given is, of course, to make these collections known to the public, not only the research and scholarly public, but the general public at large. And one of the ways that the division performs this task is to have these lectures in which people who have knowledge of the areas for which we are responsible and often have written books or done other research come and talk about their research and their experiences. And our specialists and reference librarians, who are generally all active scholars, are the people who find and bring these individuals to speak to us. And now I'm going to ask Dr. Muhammad Salhi, one of our Arab world specialists, to come forward and introduce today's speaker. Without further ado.
Thank you, Chris. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for joining us today. Our speaker today, Marie-Claude Thomas, is currently a professor of Arabic and Middle Eastern culture at the Department of Languages and Cultures at the United States Naval Academy. Previously, Professor Thomas was a visiting professor of Arabic at Oberlin College, where she taught courses on women and gender in the modern Arab world. She also taught courses on modern Arabic thought, Arabic language and culture, and prior to that was a visiting assistant professor at Baldwin Wallace University, where she taught courses on French civilization, literature, culture, and language. She received grants and was awarded a UNESCO scholarship in Paris to conduct literature on satellites that led to the MA and DESS diplomas in journalism and information related to both Europe and the Arab World from the French Press Institute at the Sorbonne. She holds a DEA and PhD in philosophy from the University of Paris at the Sorbonne. Thomas grew up in London but during the Civil War she moved to Paris. In Lebanon, excuse me. During the Civil War she moved to Paris, where she pursued her studies and also worked with the intellectual and business Arab community. Note to the audience, this event is being videotaped for subsequent broadcast on the library's website and other media. The audience is encouraged to offer comments and raise questions during the formal question and answer period, but please be advised that your voice and image may be recorded and later broadcast as part of this event. By participating in the question and answer period, you are consenting to the library's possible reproduction and transmission of your remarks. Now, without further ado, Professor Thomas.
Thank you, Dr. Salhi, for your introduction and your kind words. So, I will be talking about Lebanon. So, as you can see, Lebanon is a tiny country, however, it's blessed by its beautiful scenery.
Excuse me, you're going to need to...
Okay.
Oh.
Thank you. So, Lebanon is known as a multicultural country because today I'll be talking about women. So here we can see a women from different religious communities coexist. And also, as we can see here, we can see the church and the mosque side by side in downtown Beirut. So it's a mosaic country of different ethnic and religious groups living in harmony. That is all I want to show. Okay. Like this. It is with joy and sorrow that I open a debate about Lebanon, a country marked by a 15-year civil war and at this moment endangered by violence in neighboring countries. I can't do much but deplore the situation of war that at once ravaged my country and is now reoccurring with more ferocity at its borders. As these political questions are entertained in the business of diplomats, I won't venture into this arena. I will immediately tackle the subject of my book, Living Together and Facing Modernity. Since the Arab Spring has begun to draw attention to issues of change, modernity, and women's subjectivity, I examine and describe the Lebanese alternative modernities, a state of being characterized by the relationship between religion and society. Tradition and modernity. Let me first shed light on a common misconception. A binary existence in which women must accept one of the other, tradition or modernity, no longer holds true. The transformation taking place illustrates that tradition and modern can be situated in the same social universe and even at times reinforce each other. However, women of different groups find dissonance in their interpretation of their alternative modernity. This lack of agreement threatens the unity of the country. I choose to represent the change in Lebanese religious, social, and political life through the lens of women, because women at the center of religion and society, and increasingly politics, have acted as agents and witnesses of change. As a rapid change profoundly transformed Lebanese society, I endeavor to fit the description on this ongoing change into a societal context where important choices are already appearing. Choices between the openness to the West or its rejection, between the adoption of secularism or its rejection, between literal written scriptures and movement, between pluralism or sectarianism. The context of Lebanon is an interesting one when examining the relationship between religion and identity. In my work, women take center stage, and their status is used to define modernity. Women are a symbol of modernity through their visibility within their own communities and in relation to Western ideas. By emphasizing the ways nuances of modernity are lived and shaped by Lebanese women, I underline the separability of religion and identity. The extent to which religion and identity are intertwined or separated often defines each individual interpretation of modernity, leading to the alternative modernities, a topic that is at the center of my book and this talk. The Lebanese system of governance is based on a formula that we call as-sigha, that was intended as a successful example of conviviality between diverse communities, and at times of prosperity proved itself to be true. Of the 18 confessions in Lebanon, each has its own quota of seats in government based on the share of the population they represent. For example, the president of Lebanon is a Maronite Christian to represent the Maronite Christian that was, at the time of the conception of the confessional system, the largest group. As a result of this confessional system, political and social reforms require consensus between all confessions that are an integral part of the Lebanese pluralistic political system. This plurality of confessions made way for enrichment for the country on the cultural and social level, making Lebanon the most democratic and open society in the Arab world, at least since its independence in 1945 until the 70s. Unfortunately, the contrary side of this pluralistic system manifested itself in the many confrontations and divisions that exploded in civil war and that the Lebanese endured. Christians and Muslims, and by extension Christian and Muslim women, are a product of the same shared and lived experience and are both influenced by each other's cultures and religions. The categories of Muslim and Christians are not surrounded by clear lines due to the complexity and differences within a religious group driven by class and education. My recent returns to Lebanon shook my belief in the possibility of a unified Lebanese national identity. My perspective stems from my upbringing in a family committed to the Christian faith and from the French education I acquired growing up in Beirut, where for us modernity was based on the Enlightenment Western philosophy, embracing the French concept of laïcité, broadly defined as the French version of secularism. Therefore, my model of modernity for intellectual, social, and political progress was the universal Occidental Western model in the Hegelian sense. For Hegel, philosophy in the 18th century surpassed theology as the dominant practice to achieve supreme knowledge and attain the truth. The history of humanity was no longer explained through revelation or religious messages, but instead as a progression of the human mind, of which revelation was a necessary stage. Following the Hegelian philosophy, societies today should be less religious than they were 30 years ago. But we are witnessing the return of the question of religion as inherent to our contemporary era. We have seen that in many parts of the world, namely the Middle East, religion is an integral part of personal and group identities. Societies that are more secular are characterized by the way their founding principles choose to incorporate religion. We must define modernity to include the relationship between religion and society. There are a number of models for this relationship, but which is the correct model for Lebanon, a country characterized by its unique sigha, or political formula? Now I will move to part one, in which I will discuss women, religion, and society from the village to Beirut. Here I will be talking about my own village, my native village that is called Sarbin. So I choose to begin to treat the status of women in my native village of Sarbin, a predominantly Christian village in the Bekaa Valley. While the focus is the comings and goings of Sarbin's female inhabitants, I expand my research as much as possible to include the surrounding Muslim environment and multicultural Beirut. In this village of transformation, the manner of existence of the women, rural or urban, through their various stages of their lives, indicates different mentalities for different social classes. However, regardless of her social milieu, a woman's life actualizes the image she has of herself through the conditioning lens of an anonymous but present other in her daily activity. This is still what defines a woman. The dominant mentality valuing marriage as achieving a woman's integral social dignity remains alive. And while changing the model of traditional behavior, the need to maintain a facade of conformity remains strong. For example, unhappily married couples may choose to maintain the facade of a happily married couple in order to conform to the expectation placed upon them by the society. So the village played a historic role as a center for schooling and education for its population and for the residents of the surrounding villages. Muslim girls and boys from the neighboring villages attended the private Christian schools in great numbers. This trend changed after the rise of Shia expansion of charitable Islamic associations or Jam'iyat al-Islamiyya that opened schools in the neighboring village of Mashkhara. These two models of education are now juxtaposed. The one model integrates local and Western values and promotes secularism. Another model promoting a religious identity for young girls. These societal changes shaped girls' identity at an early stage. Pedagogy in Lebanon does not work toward the unification between different confessions. On the contrary, programs push toward divisions between confessions, and there is an emphasis on having a sense of belonging to one confession rather than creating and basking in a national identity. The work of women outside the home is seen at all levels. These entrepreneurial changes are constantly evolving in response to the demands of new economic, societal, and political realities, and are no longer represented as a juxtaposed state with the pre-existing feminine values and rules comportment. I mean, there is progress. Practicing religion has remained strong for women from the village. Indeed, the rural exodus, direct cause of modernization in their lives, ameliorating their education, social relation, and economic opportunities, has not diminished the spiritual fervor of women. Piety does not stand in the path of modernity. On the contrary, the rural exodus has been changing the face of churches, and maybe you can say also that of mosque, but later, in the city. In recent history, rural families moved from village to the city because of political unrest. They brought with them their piety and rural traditions of practice and their high attendance to daily masses. City churches became filled to the extreme. The increase in demand for churches caused the Lebanese Christian to build more churches or renovate and enlarge existing ones in order to accommodate the increasing number of faithful. Now I will move to part two. So in part two, I discuss Muslim Lebanese women and an Islamic modernity, and in particular the alternative modernity of Hezbollah's women, which does not represent all Islam. The political dimension of sectarianism set the stage for a power-sharing confessional system, which in turn led to the intervention of external forces into Lebanese political life, further disturbing the harmony of an already divided political landscape. The emergence of Hezbollah had a significant impact on both the Lebanese social and political landscape. For example, the 2009 legislative elections had Lebanese voters wondering how a Hezbollah win might impact the country's future identity. My participation in the election of May 2009 allowed me to examine the real change in the participation of women in Lebanese political life. Women engaged in the election as candidates, as organizers of voting stations, and as voters themselves. At the same time, this election launched a series of discourses around the country of how the outcome of the election would impact the trajectory of the national identity. The the move towards more discourse can only promote a more unified and pluralistic Lebanon. In modern Arab thought, reformers from two different points of view emerge to address the status of Muslim women. The question of the status of women, among other social, political, and theological issues, mark the emergence of modern Islam. Some reformers admit Western progress and want to be open to it, while others react differently and proclaim a pure and unchanging Islam, thus envisioning progress and modernity as grounded in religion and as the return to traditional Islam. This context of modernization is a focal point in the discussion of conciliating Eastern and Western perspectives. Upon the independence of Lebanon from the French Mandate in 1945, women formed non-confessional associations to fight for universal rights of women, as Christian and Muslim women participated side by side in protests for independence. At the same time, divergent voices of feminism, each expressing their own interpretation of modernity, were emerging in Egypt. 30 years later, these divergent voices made their way to Lebanon during and after the Civil War. What prompted this change in Lebanon? At this time, Sheikh Hussein Fadlallah emerged as a reformer, interpreting Islam and founding the social group Hezbollah based on his new tafsir, or interpretation. Between the source of tradition, or marja taqlid, and doctrinal ijtihad, meaning the effort of legal reasoning to understand the law revealed by God through the Prophet, Fadlallah addressed the spiritual and material issues of women for the new generation of Shi'i. These thoughts contributed to the Islamic modernity in Lebanon. Lebanon has since witnessed the growing role of Hezbollah's women, mothers, daughters, wives, and sisters, fulfilling their societal roles, but also acting as agents of change and sometimes activists from behind the scene, an activism that rejects an alignment with secular feminist movements. The alternative model of modernity is grounded in an authenticated Islam and represented by Hezbollah's women, who define themselves as deeply modern, cosmopolitan, and pious. Their goal is to appeal not only to the advancement of women, but also to a broader social base across social and political classes through the Islamist movements in which they participate. So in the face of a variety of societal changes, there has also been a return to hijab, or the veil. One woman spoke of her mother, who did not wear, I went to the village of Mashara, which is next to my native village, Sarbin, and I interviewed women from the organization Hezbollah. So one woman spoke of her mother, who did not wear the veil, and who used to live in Mexico. Now she says her mother is wearing it, and she is proud to wear it, thanks to Imam Khomeini. She believed that the West should not influence Mashara, and that hijab is a way to protect girls, and sees it as a part of the Imam revolution. The women I interviewed discussed the roots of Islam and the Quran. They felt that the revival of the Quran is in their best interest. Most girls now grew up wearing the hijab, and they do not think of removing it. Hijab is not seen as a barrier to cultural life. Even in the swimming pool, women wear their clothes and headscarf and feel comfortable. Faith, the women agreed, is rooted in the doctrine, not in the customs. Here I would like to point out to Qasim Amin, a 19th century lawyer and reformer who was a member of the Arab Renaissance of the Nahda, who advocated the removal of the veil as part of liberation of women, relegating the veil to customs and not to the doctrine, whereas the women of Hezbollah relegate the veil to doctrine, not to customs. Relations between men and women have limits, they said, and the way a woman interacts and her behavior engender respect from her surroundings. She added that relations between Christians and Muslims have improved recently, one woman commented lightly that there is an appreciation and awareness of customs from both sides now. So the political situation, strained relationship in the past, differences are still poignant among politicians, but among regular people, many problems have dissipated. The war had a significant impact. But alhamdulillah, grace be to God, now Christians and Muslims alike are working toward unity. So that was my interview with the woman from Hezbollah in Mashkhara. Gender equality regarding inheritance also abides by a certain cultural norm. The rule is that a brother may inherit its share double than that of his sister. The reasoning is societal. Men bear the responsibility to financially provide for the family. A woman can use her inheritance as she pleases, and the law does not require her to spend it on her household or family. So, modernity and traditions continue to coexist in Mashkhara and elsewhere in Lebanon. However, these women, in contrast with Christian women, are not at all interested in a secular society. For them, religious thought on both the individual and institutional levels are an integral part of the construction of their alternative modernities. These women articulated their subjectivities and reformulated their societal and familial role based on Islamic teaching and the ways in which notions of modernity and their pieties intersect, which shapes their daily lives. Now I will move to the third part of my talk, titled Multiculturalism and Cultural Identity in Lebanon. Multiculturalism is precisely this search for a new equilibrium between cultural, religious pluralism and national integration. What does modernity mean in this context? The alternative modernity's conceptual thesis, as concretely lived, has shaped thinking about the meaning of terms like evolution, progress, development, history, and politics in contemporary Arab thought. On the one hand, we witness women from communities in favor of secularism and civil society, but yet characterized by the way their founding principles choose to incorporate religion. On the other hand, we witness a modernity in which religion is an integral part of personal group identities, as we have seen in many parts of the world. In Lebanon, two models of modernity indicate two models for women's identity. They are a reflection of two mentalities embedded in the pluralistic Lebanese mold. It is crucial for these two mentalities to find harmony as they evolve, to deepen the solidarity among Lebanese women and surmount the divisive consequences of sectarianism. For example, one of the women I interviewed, who I will call Rula, but this woman is from the Christian village. So I know her, she's in her 50s, she's economically independent, she works for a telecommunication company, and she could be completely independent. However, she still lives with her parents. She describes her situation as in constant defensiveness, her life in the village, because her conduct requires a careful weighing of options in relation to the community, who would otherwise categorize her as indecent instead of recognizing the validity of her contribution to the village. She wholeheartedly embraces Western values of women's liberation, and as a result of social prejudices and assumptions about unmarried women and her repressed desire, she strongly believes that tradition as lived in the village impedes a human's fulfillment and pursuit of happiness. Rula views secularism as the solution for the Lebanese sectarian struggle and believes that the current resurgence of religion in the neighboring village and the veiling phenomenon represent a rejection of Western values and an indication of differentiation from Christians who have a long history of alliance with the West. Women who are earning their livelihood abroad, whether permanently or temporarily, is increasing. But the percentage of young men who emigrate, 43.3%, is significantly higher than women, 23%. Consequently, there is a deficiency of young men of marriageable age between 30 and 50, which is a major factor in the dramatic increase of unmarried women over the past several decades. The percentage of single women approximately doubled from 1970 to 1996 in most age ranges, with the exception of women under the age of 25. For example, 25.1% of Lebanese women in the age range of 25-29 years were single in 1970, but this percentage increased to 46.6% as of 1996. Another increasingly popular option for Lebanese women is to marry foreigners. A recent survey of marriages between people of different nationalities in Lebanon reveals that international unions allow women to maintain the preference for finding a spouse within their religious confessions or with people of Lebanese origin living in the international diaspora. Out of the 1,700 marriages of mixed nationality that were included in the survey between 1995 and 2008, 51% identified with the Sunni community, 33.6% with the Shia community, and 5.6% with the Greek Orthodox community. It's interesting to note that the prevalence of marriages between Lebanese women and men from Arab countries was much higher among Lebanese Muslim women, Sunni and Shia, than Lebanese Christian who married European and American in relatively higher numbers. Lebanese women's clear tendencies to choose husbands living in other countries who nonetheless come from the same religious background, or in some cases even have origins from the same village, reflect a globalization of Lebanese endogamy, or marriages within one community, an adaptation of tradition to modern times. One could argue that advances in technology facilitate the perpetuation of the tradition of endogamy. I will move to the change. So multiculturalism and regionalization have reinforced the sectarian system at the disadvantage of everyone, and in particular the Christian minority, as the alternative modernity comes to the forefront of Lebanese political life. As Lebanon has evolved due to internal and regional forces, so too has the role of modernity and concepts of cultural identity. It seems that we are now in a period of divergence. Mentalities are constantly transforming, and the final outcome remains unclear, but it is certain that women will have a key role to play in the future of the religious groups and the Lebanese nation. If the principle of justice and equality is at the heart of the national construction, multiculturalism becomes debatable because it created tensions from the differing interpretation of modernity in Lebanon and around the world. Tensions among these varying interpretations are responsible for cultural misunderstandings and problems related to women's rights and obligations in a contemporary society. In the face of divisiveness, secularism presents itself as the long-term sustainable alternative to preserve a free, sovereign, democratic, and pluralistic Lebanon. There are more than 70 NGOs in Lebanon, and the young people, especially women, work to change their position within society, both Christian and Muslim alike. I can't end this talk without talking about the good work that NGOs and local activist women are doing to promote a common civic identity. For example, Indie Act is an NGO that supports campaign against sexual harassment. We have NDI, the National Democratic Institute, encourages women to embrace participation in politics without fear. Nasawiya supports campaigns against domestic violence. Laik Pride organizes marches in Beirut, big cities also, Paris and London, to amend the Lebanese personal status laws, supporting campaign for civil marriage and amending laws to enable women married to foreigners to pass their nationality onto their husbands or even to their children. So women activists are playing an important part in creating this common civic identity. For example, women activists created a draft law against domestic violence and marital rape and sent it to Parliament for adoption. The draft law passed to the subcommittee in the Parliament. However, at the request of a religiously conservative member, the committee added a clause that a woman can appear in civil court only if religious courts allow it, which essentially defeats the purpose of the law. This draft is still pending. One would bring the French saying, plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. The more we try to change, the more we stay the same. I argue that common civic responsibilities will bring Muslim and Christians, and by extension the men and women of both groups together to facilitate improved social relations and a true degree of equality for all, regardless of gender or religious affiliation. Differences are often rooted in being accountable to foreign sources and transnational movements. A unified Lebanon, hopefully, is becoming less and less of a myth as time goes on, as the mentalities of the Lebanese people begin to intersect and the prospect of solidarity are deepening the meaning of modernity, to include a place for religion resurgence adjusted for life in a secular civilization in which elected officials are accountable to their own constituencies. Now the question is to find the condition on how such a separation between religion, society, and identity can manifest itself while respecting the rights of all communities. And do you have questions? Sure.
Previously you mentioned about the French, how do you pronounce it,
Laïcité, yes.
Right, in its
Yes.
relation to secularism. Could you elaborate on that a little bit, please?
Yes, the French concept of laïcité and the multicultural concept in the United States. Well, laïcité aims at separating completely religion from the public sphere. So also secular, when we say multicultural society or secular society in America, also it's the separation of religion and state. But in France, it is the separation is more poignant, I would say. In France, you do not, in a social public place, you do not bring religion. You do not show any symbol of religion, because any symbol of religion is considered as conspicuous. And in order to understand that, we are both secular, the United States and America, but there is a big difference. Because if you think how the laïcité, how the French Republic was created, it was after the Revolution. And what was the Revolution? The Revolution was precisely a revolution against religion and against the royals at the time. Therefore, they decided to separate completely religion from politics, from the state. Whereas here in the United States, I would say maybe the opposite. Like the United States was formed by pilgrims who were persecuted for the practice of their religion in their countries of origin, and they came here to freely practice their religion. Therefore, religion interferes sometimes in the public, and it's accepted. Like when I moved to the United States, I lived in France for a long period of time, and a president of France would never mention would never say a religious word during his speech, whereas here in the United States, a president at the end would say, "God bless America," which I did not hear in Europe. So this is how we explain the difference between laïcité and the multicultural society or the secularism here in America. I hope I answered your question.
Professor, on the cover for your book, you have a landscape of the mountains looking down into the sea. And can you please explain why you chose that particular picture?
Yeah, this is the lake. This is the Litani Lake. I took this picture from the balcony of my ancestors' house in the village. So it's just because it's a beautiful view that I was used to seeing in the summer when we spent our vacation there. And also, like water is becoming extremely important, and Lebanon is very rich in its streams of water, and it looks like the next conflict is going to be about water and not oil. So Lebanon is very rich in water, so maybe it gives it a positive, futuristic perspective. And that's why I picked it. I like it, and it has a meaning. Lebanon is rich in its water. And this is what makes it very coveted nation, but by its neighbors. Yes, yes, ma'am. Yes.
How do the conservatives on both sides, Christians and the Muslims, feel about this?
Yes, well, I said it that it depends on the social class of every group. Yeah, it depends on the social class, on the level of education of each group. So now if you go to the village, where there is a village mainly organized by Hezbollah and another by Christian, you would not see that. But if you go to Beirut, I don't think there is any problem, because here we are dealing with a different social class and people are educated. And it's more and more accepted. However, the problem is that we really need we need a civil society, and we need civil law for all, because it's a big problem for young people to marry, whether from the same religious community or from the another religious community. So it's more complicated if they marry someone from the other community. Now the problem is that in case of, if the union goes well, it's fine. Now if there is a problem and they need a divorce, then Lebanon has 18 personal statuses, so which complicates the matters. And I'm very hopeful, because now the new generation, the students at the American University and even at the University of St. Joseph and elsewhere, Christian and Muslim young women and men are really asking for a civil society, one set of rules for all, in order to resolve the current problems. Because economically also this contributes to more difficulties for young couples. So did I answer your question? Yes, sir. The civil marriage officially does not exist, but young people are asking for it, and vehemently. And now, however, a couple can go to Cyprus is the closest place to Lebanon. But like many unions took place in France, and in France they use the civil marriage. So it is recognized, but it is recognized, but still it's not implemented in Lebanon. But the young people are really asking for it, and with the help of the NGOs such as Laik Prides that I mentioned. Yes, so they are for it, okay? So now it's more and more accepted. We are building a national identity. We do not want to define ourselves as Christian or Muslim, because it's very dangerous to reduce the identity of one person to the religion. When you talk about identity, it is what you have become through your lifetime. For example, I was born in Lebanon. I cannot come here and say, "Oh, I'm Lebanese." I would not be. It won't be a reflection of who I am. So I grew up in Lebanon in a Christian community. Then the war started. I went to France, so I was French educated. So I acquired this French education, this French culture. After that, I got married, and then I moved to the United States. I raised my children, so I Americanized myself. So I acquired the American culture from its beginning. And now, my identity, I would never say I am just American, or I'm just Lebanese, or I am all these elements together. So I can say I'm Lebanese, I am American, I am French, I am Catholic, I acquired the French education. So all that forms my identity. It's very dangerous to reduce or compartmentalize the identity to just one element, especially religion. And this is the danger that we are currently living. Yes. There is no relationship now. Women should go to the religious courts, because the personal status law we do not have a civil one yet. So it's all religious. However, now when religious law came with a sentence, the government or the administration or the police would really apply it That's it. This is the only relation. Does that make sense to you? Yes. Anything else? خلاص.
Thank you, Professor Marie-Claude.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.